Coming up on this special edition of Jerusalem Dateline, celebrating the redemption of a people in the Jewish holiday of Passover, and keeping the hostages in mind who won't be at the Seder table. Plus, a former Hezbollah member who felt justified in his life as a terrorist, and Lebanese singer Carine Bassili building bridges with her music. All this and more coming up on this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this special edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. Here we are at Passover 2024, in the midst of war and with hostages still in Gaza. Yet it's a holiday of remembrance for the Jewish people, a commemoration of God's faithfulness in delivering the children of Israel from slavery in Egypt. It's a celebration of a God who sees the distress of his people and moves on their behalf. At Passover, families gather around the dinner table for prayers and a very symbolic meal called a Seder.
The Seder is a big, multi-generational celebration. Family and friends gather together for a meal and recount the Exodus story of how God delivered the Jewish people from slavery in Egypt.
Passover is a memorial, and it's a remembrance of God's act of redemption on behalf of the Jewish people to bring them out of slavery, bring them into the Promised Land, in fulfillment of his promises to Abraham and fulfillment of his covenant.
Just hours before the holiday begins, Jewish people burn the last bit of chametz or leaven outside. Near the beginning of every Seder, the youngest child traditionally sings the question, Ma nishtana halayla hazeh? What's different about this night? During the Seder, a piece of matzah or unleavened bread that is striped and pierced is broken in two pieces, and half of it is hidden for the children to find at the end of the Seder. In the biblical account, shown here in CBN's Superbook for Children, the plagues are listed: blood, frogs, lice, cattle disease, pestilence, boils, hail, locust, darkness, and death of the firstborn.
Every plague actually is dismantling of one of the gods of Egypt.
The children of Israel paint the doorposts with the blood of an innocent lamb, so the death angel passes over. The story concludes with the miraculous deliverance of the Jewish people from Egypt the next morning, leaving a life of slavery for freedom. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Rabbi Yitzhak Adlerstein, an Orthodox rabbi and longtime friend of CBN, is a teacher and senior member of the Simon Wiesenthal Center. He always goes deep, so I was curious to hear his thoughts about this Passover at this moment in Israel's history. So, Rabbi, how is this Passover in the midst of war different, or how are Jewish people looking at this Passover because of, here we are now, more than half a year into a war?
So we just remind you, Chris, that this is not the first time in the last 2,000 years that we've been celebrating Passover under difficult circumstances. If Passover were a national liberation holiday, we would have lots to worry about. How can we really celebrate in the middle of an existential war? You know, nobody a week ago was betting that we necessarily would be here a week later. But this has happened many times before. Why is it that Jews were not crushed by their circumstances? Because Passover was not just a tearing asunder of the chains of bondage. It wasn't liberation from, but liberation to. We became a people that entered into a covenant with God that 7 weeks later we could stand at Sinai, where the whole world heard the 10 Commandments. That can never be taken away from us. At the very beginning of the Seder that we'll celebrate Monday night, we own up to that and we say, look, we're slaves still today. We're enslaved to different countries and different forces, but we're still free. Because that freedom, the essential freedom, the freedom to be in a communion with God, that was never taken away and never will be taken away. So this is more of the same. On top of the idea that this month of Nisan, it's the Hebrew name for the month, was always seen as the month of redemption. So we're hoping that we'll see more signs like we did last Saturday night, and that the full redemption that we've been waiting for 2,000 years, and I would venture to say most of the believing world has also been waiting for, will finally happen.
Well, thank you, Rabbi. We hope so too.
Thank you.
At each Passover, Jewish people around the world celebrate the Exodus from Egypt with a Passover Seder. One of the key elements is unleavened bread, or matzah. Here's a look at how they make matzah in Israel.
The Bible calls it the bread of affliction, unleavened bread or matzah. Every year, the Jewish people are commanded to retell the story of their exodus from Egypt and to eat unleavened bread for 7 days.
Because the Lord made them live very fast, they had to make bread that didn't have time to rise, and they ate these flat breads, which is matzah.
Most Israelis take the commandment to eat unleavened bread very seriously, and many actually like it. Grocery stores like this one devote whole sections to it. And besides regular matzah, you can get egg, whole wheat, and even choco matzah.
The regular matzah must be made of flour and water only. The flour would look to you and at like regular flour, but it's not regular flour.
Roy Wolf is vice president of Matzot Aviv. He told CBN News the whole process, from mixing to rolling to shaping to baking, must be finished in 18 minutes, because the moment water touches the flour, it starts rising.
In reality, our process is much, much faster. We want to be as efficient as possible, and the whole process takes no longer than 3-4 minutes. But every 15 minutes, in order to avoid to have any leftovers of leavened dough, we have to clean the mixer system.
Wolf is the 6th generation to work in his family's business, which started in 1887. They've been in the current factory since 1946.
In the basements here where we have the flour silos today, the Haganah, the first defense forces, used to hide the weapons from the British mandate. Since 1946 we've been here making matzah. Of course, the factory was refurbished several times.
At Matzot Aviv, they make about 20 tons of matzah per day. They start in October and work around the clock for the last month, except on the Sabbath, to provide matzah to Jewish communities in Israel and around the world.
We are exporting to over 35 countries, to all Jewish communities around the world. From the large communities in North America to even the smallest community. There's one person that's in Wallis Island. He's the doctor of the island, and we are sending him matzah every year. And so he will be able to have a Seder with matzah from Israel. But we also have Christian communities buying matzah in countries like Korea and Singapore, where it's, I've been told that in some churches it's been used as the holy bread.
The Last Supper would have been a Passover Seder with unleavened bread. Because of that, many Christians like to take communion with matzah. Some even say that the design of the matzah, striped and pierced, is symbolic of the Messiah himself. You might think with all this matzah making that the Wolf family would get tired of Passover, but not so.
We're waiting for this Seder. We usually come very tired to the Seder because I'm working until the same day in the afternoon. But it means a lot. This holiday, of course, means a lot to us.
One Israeli compared matzah to a data drive, passing along information from generation to generation. Coming up, at Kibbutz Nir Oz, remembering loved ones missing at this year's Passover table.
Well, to talk more about Passover 2024 here in Israel is CBN News Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl. Julie, recently you were in Kibbutz Nir Oz. I was there about 2 weeks ago. Just devastated. Of all the kibbutzim I've visited, I think that was the one that was really the hardest to go through.
Yeah.
And recently they had a Seder to bring the plight of the hostages that came out of Nir Oz, and they won't be there for the Seder meal this year.
Yeah, that's right, Chris. Actually, they didn't have a Seder. They just set up the table. You know, it has the yellow chairs, the theme color with all the people that are still missing. More than a quarter of the people from Nir Oz were either kidnapped or killed on October 7th. Yeah. And more than 30 are still missing. And some of them, like the Bibas family, they don't even know what their fate is. And recently they released a video from October 7th showing the father, Yarden Bibas, being beaten. So there's a lot of angst, and really the people are crying out what Moses said, "Let my people go."
Yeah. You know, as we were talking before, Passover and the Seder meal in particular is such a family occasion.
It is.
And you know, when I was in there, I was struck by the fact of how close these people were. I mean, literally, like, grandchild can be just across the street. Not even a street, it's a path.
Yeah, and you know, like where the Seder table was set up, it's the communal dining room. They all come together. I don't know if everyone comes all the time, but there's room in the dining room for everybody to come and eat meals together every day. And it's a very close-knit kind of community, family. And now this year, you know, more than 100,000 Israelis are still displaced.
Yeah.
From the north, from the south. Although they are together, unlike COVID when everybody was separated, at least they're together in community settings.
Yeah, so instead of a community setting, a family home, many of them are in a hotel.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Talk about this, you know, just a few days ago, you know, we had, some would say like an apocalyptic preview.
Yeah.
Hundreds of missiles coming against Israel. What makes this different this year? I mean, we're literally having a face-to-face war with Iran.
Yeah, well, you know, I think most Israelis will have their Seder like they usually do, or some form of it. If they're in their own homes, people will visit each other, they will do that, but it probably won't be quite as joyful as it usually is. And, you know, there's a lot of pressure right now. There's a lot of anticipation about what's coming next. You know, Iran threatening that if Israel does anything, then they'll, you know, totally annihilate the Zionist entity. And, you know, we know God's not going to let that happen. He's done many, many miracles.
We have read the end of the book.
We have done that, yes. Yeah. So, and he has done many, many miracles.
Yeah, and many people see that as just a complete miracle, like of biblical proportions. Talk about modern Israel right now. I mean, it's gone through 1948, 1967, 1973, and it seems like here we are in 2024. That began on October 7, 2023, as you know, just almost parallel to some of the major threats the Jewish people had throughout their history.
It's true. And, you know, the 1948 war, God reestablished Israel, you know, in that time, even before that, bringing the Jewish people back to the land. And it was always against all odds, you know, which is sort of what we're facing now, against all odds. In 1967, they were digging graves in the streets because they were sure they were going to be wiped out. And 6 days later, they won and had increased their territory, much to the chagrin of others. Yeah. But, you know, and in 1973, the Yom Kippur War came upon them by surprise also. We had just marked the 50th anniversary the day before October 7th. Yeah. So, you know, but God has done many, many miracles, making the desert bloom, rebuilding. One of my favorite things is in Tel Aviv, the center of the secular world, there's a scripture about God rebuilding Israel.
And we see that today.
We do.
Julie Stahl, great to be with you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Still ahead, the mindset of a killer, one man's explanation of his years as a Hezbollah fighter.
Pivoting from Passover to a story about a different kind of deliverance, the man in our next interview was in captivity to an ideology, radical Islam. As a Hezbollah soldier, he committed himself to holy war and the destruction of the Jewish state. Recently, we had him in studio to hear his thinking during his time as a soldier. What is the mindset of these Hezbollah fighters? And as they anticipate a war with Israel, or as they say, the Zionist entity, and how can we pray?
I gotta tell you what I felt when I was part of Hezbollah, when I volunteered to work on landmines. Two elements. It was the element of me believing in Islam, but the hurt that I had, the desperation. I lived in Abadan. We lost our home within half an hour in the bombs, the first city that got attacked. All of that loss helped create an atmosphere in my heart and mind for the mullahs, for the imams, to fill it with anger, hatred, and lies. So when people go to war with Israel, there is all of their pain of having lost cousins, having had nothing to live for, the normal things you hope for your children. Most of these people don't have that, don't enjoy university for their children and all these things. So that is part of the problem. But that is used by the mullahs, by the imams, to turn that into a hatred against the Jews and say, America is at fault, then Israel is at fault, this is at fault, that's, and then gets them all riled up. Allah wants you to do this. And I want to challenge the body of believers to have a heart for all these people and pray peace and revelation. But also, if I can take this, if there is any Muslim seeing this right now, I want to challenge them. And I want to say, how come all these mullahs who believe so much in the will of Allah and who believe in heaven and being a martyr, how come they are not on the front line? How come their sons and daughters and their grandchildren are not on the front line? And I want to challenge every Muslim to not be deceived by the lies of these bunch of liars that are in only for money. And they know that my life is online because I'm calling them out. But I'm speaking the truth, and they know it, the Muslims know it, and they should give up on their lies. They should sit down and ask God, the God of heaven, the God of Abraham, the God that sent so many prophets to them like Moses. Ask him, what is your will? Reveal to us your will. If Muslims are hearing, if the Christian body is there, we should pray that they would ask this question and their eyes would be open to the lies of the governing body that is just self-centered because their own things. They're layering their pockets with millions. They're not in for the Muslim people. And that they know is true because I was one of them that lived under that. So we can pray for revelation and for the blindness to go away.
Up next, intertwined destinies, renewing historic connections between Israel and Lebanon.
Even though missiles are often flying toward Israel from southern Lebanon, courtesy of Hezbollah, that hasn't always been the case. Ancient connections between Israel and Lebanon can be found throughout the Bible. In modern times, these connections frayed. Our next story is about the rebirth of relations between Israel and Lebanon through music and a spiritual renewal. Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl has more.
It was a collaboration that got the world's attention. On paper, it shouldn't have happened. Carine Bassili, a Christian Lebanese-American singer who grew up in war-torn Beirut, singing in a video with Orthodox Israeli Jew Yair Levy, also an IDF soldier who only knew Lebanon as a place of war. It started out with Yair Levy's music video sung with shy soul of his song Rafana, crafted from a prayer in the Bible. For him, it was a plea to God for healing for his grandmother. His video went viral and took on a larger meaning, a plea for healing for Israel and for war-torn countries around the world. It was a message that captured the world's heart. Singers around the world did versions of it in their languages.
I heard the song and it really touched me. It was simple prayer, simple words, but I think the spirit that it was on the song was very strong, that really I was very sensitive to it. And, I connected to Yair and the Lord just took it from there.
Carine Bassili then did a cover of Rafana in Arabic, which caught Yair's attention and led them to doing a collaboration in Arabic and Hebrew. Her work with Yair led to plans for a future collaboration with him and American musician Sean Foyt, which they released just weeks after October 7th. It was another song that took on a larger meaning since Israel had just been pulled into a war of self-defense.
God of Israel, blessed be your name. Kadosh Israel, Kadosh Israel, Kadosh Israel, Yitbach Shemcha. Kudus Israel, Kudus Israel, Kudus Israel, Nubarak Usmaka.
Once known as the Paris of the Middle East, Lebanon was once a thriving country with a majority Christian population. Mentioned more than 70 times in the Old and New Testaments, it has a rich biblical history. Through an alliance with Hiram, the Phoenician king of Tyre, King Solomon used cedar trees from Lebanon in building the first temple. Elijah raised the son of a widow from the dead in Zarephath between Tyre and Sidon, and Jesus and his disciples traveled to Tyre and Sidon. Carine spoke to us about a day in the future when citizens of Israel and Lebanon will have close relations again.
I'm so grateful that the Lord is awakening a generation right now. There's so many people in Lebanon are awakened to the truth and aligning with God and seeing, God's heart through the scripture. There's many Lebanese that are here in the country and they are in Lebanon. And I'm telling you, they do not hate Israel. I know that of a fact. I cannot obviously say names or anything, but there's so many people who are looking forward to the day that the border is going to open up, and I believe that is a promise for the Lord personally to me, that the border is going to open up and I'm going to go to my country. And there's many people in Lebanon are waiting for the day to connect to their cousins. Honestly, we're cousins. We do have the same blood. We have the same DNA. If you go to Lebanon and do the DNA of the people over there, I'll tell you, many of them, they're going to have Jewish blood over there.
Well, I look forward to seeing the good things that God's going to do in Lebanon also. And thank you so much, Carine Bassili, for joining us on Jerusalem Dateline.
Thank you so much for having me.
What a great story. Well, that's all for this special edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Thanks for joining us. And we want to wish a happy Passover to all our Jewish friends. Please continue to pray for the peace of Jerusalem and for the release of all the hostages. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.